This content is brought to you by Link2, which makes private equity investment easy. Link2 is a great platform that allows you to get equity in companies before they go public, before they do an IPO. Within their portfolio includes crypto companies, AI companies, and fintech companies. Some of the crypto companies you may recognize include Circle, Ripple, Chainalysis, Ledger, Dapper Labs, and many more. If you'd like to learn more about Link2, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Dr. Leemon Baird, who's the co-founder of Hedera and the co-CEO of Swirls Labs. Dr. Leemon, it is great to have you on the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
As I was saying before the recording, I'm a big fan of Hedera. I've interviewed Mance and a few folks from your end as well, and really excited to be speaking with you. Before we get into all things Hedera, I'd love to get to know you a bit better. Tell us about yourself. Where are you from and where'd you grow up?
Well, I am from everywhere, at least in the United States. So from the day I was born to now, on average, I've moved every 3 years.
Wow.
So I've been all in the United States. I haven't really lived overseas, done lots of visiting overseas, but I've moved around a lot. And so I spent 24 years in the Air Force. I've been starting companies for the last 23 years, all of them with Mance. We've co-founded a whole bunch of companies, and I got to be a college professor for a long time. I got to be a research scientist for a long time. I can never just do one thing. I'm kind of scatterbrained and just keep doing different things.
It sounds like you got the entrepreneurial bug. You're an entrepreneur at heart, and you and Mance have done some build a lot of different companies.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Tell us about how the idea of co-founding Hedera came about.
So one of the fun stuff I do is just math problems, just for fun. So I have these math problems that I just work on because they're fun. They're puzzles, and some of them I go for decades, and I'll never solve them, and I know that, but it's okay. It's just fun. One of them was, well, could computers come to agreement in a way that's really, really fast and really, really secure? Not because I wanted to use it for anything. It's just a really cool math problem. So in 2012, I started working on that, and I worked on that for several years. And in 2015, I had repeatedly convinced myself it was unsolvable. So it's just, I will work on it for a week, and I'll just look at all the parts, and I say, yeah, you have to choose. You can be secure, you can be fast. You really can't be both. And I would put it aside, but some problems just keep coming back and gnawing at me. And in 2015, I realized, wait a second, if you just add 2 hashes to every message you sent, so every message remembers what is the last message I sent and the last message I received, then suddenly any computer that collected all those messages will actually be able to see the history of how information flowed through the network. And then you can run these really old algorithms that are super secure, asynchronous, Byzantine, fault tolerant, whose only problem is that you have to send lots of votes back and forth and receipts on votes, lots of traffic. But you could do them with zero traffic, with virtual voting, and you'd have all the power and security of that, but you would have just blazing speed, because all you have to do is gossip out the transactions, which you have to do anyway, and then there is zero additional communication to reach ABFT consensus with all kinds of math proofs. So that was in 2015, and Mance and I looked at that and said, you know what, that would be a good company, and so then we went from there.
Wow. And I'm curious about the parallel of blockchain and crypto in addition to Hedera and what you were trying to solve, the problem. Was there a aha moment when maybe you first saw Bitcoin or different cryptocurrencies, and you're like, well, this is possibly a solution I can merge into Hashgraph or whatever it may be? Is that kind of something that took place?
A little bit different. So of course I was aware of these things, and I thought, oh, that's cool. Proof of work, Bitcoin, that's interesting. For whatever reason, it's not particularly math that is interesting to me right now. I want to know what's going on in the world. I know about that. It's cool, and maybe will have important impacts on things. But in 2015, we realized, wait a second, you can have both security and speed at the same time, whereas a proof of work protocol like that has neither. It's not ABFT, it's not BFT, it's not fast, it's certainly not green if you're using lots of electricity. And so in 2015, what we realized is that surprisingly, this answer would allow you to build an incredibly fast and secure distributed ledger technology, so a blockchain, a DLT. And so we actually started a company to do that, private DLTs. And then the second big thing that we realized is in 2016, I remember we were sitting in a restaurant and we realized, you know, what you really need is good governance. Nobody has truly good decentralized governance. You say, well, it's decentralized. Anyone in the world can govern. And then what you end up with is a small handful of people that just kind of rise to the top and have the power, and they end up doing the governing. What you really need is to have huge organizations, schools, universities, companies that are well respected, that are not going to be bribed for $1 million. You have to bribe them $1 billion to do something bad because they care about their reputation.
Sure.
You then have them govern with guarantees that no one has more power than another. So if you have 29 council members, each of them owns exactly 1/29th. And has exactly 1/29th of the power in the voting. And you publish the minutes of their discussions. You have transparency in your governance. And so for a public ledger, that was the killer app, or the killer property, was being able to have this good decentralized governance that's guaranteed to not allow the power to just sort of accumulate over time into one small handful of people behind the scenes running everything. And so that was the idea then. We had Hashgraph was a really cool idea for how to build a network that is fast and secure. But then we said, we could do a council, and that would be good governance. And putting the two together then is what Hedera was.
So, and I know I understand a lot of this through doing research and so forth, but I know there's a lot of new people who are going to say, well, you know, how is Hashgraph then different from the other blockchains out there? Is Hashgraph a hybrid blockchain? You know, how could you categorize it? Because I know it's not a true blockchain, but it has attributes of blockchain, if I'm summarizing that correctly. Can you break it down in layman terms for us?
Of course. So our field, our industry, has this horrible habit of giving one word multiple meanings. Blockchain means two radically different things. Things like wallet mean two different things. Is it an account, or is it the software used to manage that account? Both are called wallets. And I'll even see people write sentences. I used my wallet to manage my wallet. Okay. Blockchain's the same way. A blockchain, if it is a group of computers that come to consensus and have immutable data that they are agreeing on in a decentralized way, if that's what a blockchain is, then Hedera is a blockchain. It's an unusually fast blockchain, an unusually secure blockchain, and it's well governed, which is almost unique among all these ledgers. So if blockchain means ledger, it's a blockchain, it's a really good one. You could say, though, that blockchain is referring to how you come to consensus. You do it by building a chain of blocks, and maybe what you do is you have a leader that decides who the next block will be at any given moment. Oh, wait a second. If we're going to have a leader decide, then if we know the leaders in advance, we have a real problem, because an attacker could flood that leader's computer with packets and shut it down. And even if you change leaders every few seconds, if you announce ahead of time who they're going to be, then the attacker can just follow the leader and shut down your whole network for a long time by shutting down one computer at a time. So if blockchain means that particular way of getting consensus, oh no, there's radically better ways of doing it. So the hash graph is the way of doing it. So instead of saying, we're going to have leaders that are chosen randomly. Maybe you know them ahead of time, maybe you don't. They take turns adding one block to the chain every few seconds or every few minutes. Instead of that, in Hashgraph, every validator is pumping out blocks as fast as it can, and all of them end up in the consensus sequence. They all end up in a particular order in consensus. No stale branches that have to be cut off, no taking turns. The fastest, most resilient way to do things is don't take turns. Don't have a leader. Don't even take turns having a leader. Just everybody blasts out what they want all the time. And as a group, they come to consensus on what order to put them in, which, of course, was that really hard problem that we solved 30 years ago, but takes too much communication. And now we do it with zero additional communication. And so that is how Hedera works. It's built on the Hashgraph algorithm that gives you all these secure guarantees, because there is never a leader, not even for a moment, which is why it's the A in ABFT. Asynchronous means you don't have to worry about an attacker shutting down one computer at a time and destroying your whole network.
And tell us about the governance council. So, I mean, amazing names on this council. And to your point, these brands have trusts, they have a history, they have a public record, you know who they are, and there's some accountability and, things that they're not going to try to do because they have to protect their brand, their value, their stocks, and so forth. How were you able to get the likes of Google and IBM and all these folks to join the council?
I don't know. In 2016, Mance and I said, let's just create a council out of the top, Fortune 100 companies and top 10 universities in the world. That was insane. Okay, we have been blessed. I don't know how it happened, but it did. And so, yes, we have Google and IBM and LG Electronics, and we have the biggest bank in all of Africa and the oldest bank in all of South Korea and the biggest telecom in Europe. We have an amazing set of things. We have top universities in the world, top 10 universities. So, University College of London and London School of Economics and IIT in India. We just have this amazing council. And I am just blown away that it actually happened. And it just keeps getting better. We have 29 members now, and we keep adding members. It's amazing. And so that was the whole point, is that we wanted to have a ledger that would work and that would be something that people can respect and trust for the next 100 years. And I think that's what drew the very top tier organizations wanted to be part of us, because they could see we had good technology. We also had good governance. And they wanted to be part of a project that really is going to be providing the trust layer of the internet for the next 100 years, not some pump and dump, flash in the pan thing. They wanted something real. And that's been our goal from the beginning, is figure out the best way to do things. What's the best way to do governance? What's the best way to do the technology and everything else across the board? And that kind of resonated with some of the top tier organizations.
For sure. And just recently, I saw the news of Hyundai and Kia, one of the largest automotive creators or vehicle makers in the world, joining the council, but also building, I believe they're tokenizing carbon credits, or if I'm not mistaken, I forgot the details, but can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, Hyundai and Kia, those are names. Those are big names. And what they're doing is they're using Hedera to be tracking carbon emissions and to help various suppliers and other people to be tracking the carbon emissions of the parts. So if you put together a car, what you really do is you're putting together parts that come from other people, and sub-assemblies are built by other people, and you want to know, well, what's the carbon footprint of this car? I don't know. I just put it together. I have to go talk to all the people who built pieces of it and find out from them. And I need to make sure that they're telling the truth. And I need to make sure that they're not lying by telling me one thing and telling someone else something else. And even for carbon credits, there might be a carbon credit because you saved a tree, but are you selling that same carbon credit to two different people? When it's really just one tree, you're really treating it like two different trees? Or did you save a tree that wasn't going to be cut down anyway? There's a lot of problems. And so what they're using is Hedera to make everything transparent and immutable and in the history where everyone in the world sees it and you all know you're seeing the same thing. And then you can tokenize carbon credits, which people are doing. And there's carbon credit markets on Hedera and markets for clean energy, and then ways of doing things like taking clean or dirty energy and carbon credits to offset it, gluing the two together, and then have markets in that, all sorts of cool things. So what these organizations are doing is they are doing this carbon credit thing. I think that is really cool, that they are not carbon credit, carbon tracking of the footprint. So that's just really cool. We're very excited to have them building on Hedera for that. And one of the reasons they built on Hedera, it is very fast and secure. You can trust it, and very inexpensive. Sending a token costs you a tenth of a penny, a thousandth of a US dollar. Even if you're sending $1 million worth of carbon credits, you pay a thousandth of a US dollar to send those million carbon credits, which is kind of cool. You can do a single transaction, actually move several different tokens at once. And Hedera is the greenest ledger. Each transaction has a carbon footprint lower than any other ledger. University College of London published a report on this that compared all these different major ledgers and even compared the Visa credit card. And Hedera was far below everyone else in the amount of carbon footprint per transaction, which appeals to people who are building something on ESG, green, carbon stuff. You might as well take something that isn't dirty as your bottom layer to build on top of. And so they were building on us for that sort of reason too. And then, of course, we buy carbon credits to offset that little bit of carbon footprint we have so that we're carbon neutral. And then we buy a few more so that we're actually carbon negative. So that's one of the reasons people like to build these things on top of us. But it's also because it's fast and it's inexpensive and it's denominated in dollars. So as the cryptocurrency goes up and down, you can predict your costs because the costs don't go up and down. That is important. It doesn't matter if you're just doing games on the network, unimportant things on the network. But if you're building a real business, including games as a real business, then you start to care about the predictable cost. And it has that too.
And you mentioned quite a few use cases there, and we know that the world is moving in the direction of tokenization. And, even like BlackRock, Larry Fink said, it's the future of finance. So tell us about the use cases that you're targeting. You mentioned some of them, like tokenizing carbon emissions. I noticed NFTs. Can folks do stable coins and CBDCs on the Hedera network? Tell us about the different use cases.
Yeah. So I think everything of value in the world will ultimately be tokenized. The world will be tokenized. And I think this is clearly the direction that we're moving. It's for the same reason that the world went from storing all their information on paper to storing it in databases. It's more efficient, it's faster, it's less bugs, it's more widely available. The same transition is now going to happen from databases that are okay as long as the person running the computer is honest, to ledgers where it's okay if some of them aren't honest. You can have dishonest people running a few of the computers, you're still okay. Sure. So it brings trust. It's like databases with trust is what ledgers are. Everything of value will be tokenized because then you can buy and sell it very fast, very cheap. You don't have to have a trusted third party, an intermediary that, I want to sell you my house. I don't have to give him my house and you give him the money and then he swaps and gives it. No, you just do it automatically on the ledger in a few seconds for a tenth of a penny or a thousandth of a US dollar. And then you can do this, and you can even create markets for things that haven't had markets. Some of these interesting carbon credit things are markets that didn't even exist. You can do even more complicated markets. So you have people like Galaxy building on top of us to help other people tokenize things you wouldn't even think about. Like an entertainer can tokenize the ability to vote on what shoes they will wear in the next basketball game, because that's a huge collector's item. But now they can give feedback and have influence on that. Or you can tokenize the ability to have lunch with a famous person. All sorts of things that markets can't exist for right now. Items in games, the magic sword or the gold coins in the game, or your avatar, or a designer handbag. All those things can be tokenized and they go from game to game. We are seeing people now tokenizing on Hedera real things. So real estate. I talked with a woman who has tokenized her house on Hedera. And the idea is that you have this new model that hasn't existed before, where instead of going to the bank and getting a mortgage to buy the house, you sell little pieces of the house to lots of individual people who then get your rent. You pay rent every month and it kind of gets split up among them. It's crazy. Whole new business models are enabled by tokenization. The world is going to end up tokenized. It increases the efficiency too much. And so we're seeing that. We're seeing things like fine art and wine and expensive things being tokenized because then you can easily invest and buy little pieces of it. We're seeing people tokenizing things like gold, at which point you get into things like stable coins. Lots of stable coins out there, and they're being built on Hedera because Hedera is an important platform. But stable coins are important because it's predictable. And lots of people like the idea of tokenizing gold and having some of that because it has lots of predictability. In tough times, people want tokenized gold. You mentioned CBDCs. These are central bank digital currencies. So this is when a government makes their actual currency be a cryptocurrency. It's tokens on a ledger, which is interesting. Most of the money in the world already is ones and zeros in a database on a computer.
Right.
But this makes it a more secure kind of computer. And it makes it a kind of computer that can interoperate with ledgers very easily. You could do wrapped coins moving from one ledger to another. And so some people have even said, well, all the currency in the world is already a CBDC. It's all computers. It's all ones and zeros. Yeah. But we're about to go to the place where it becomes part of this ecosystem where you buy and sell tokenized assets very cheaply. And so we're getting to that point. I think that the literal CBDC itself for any country is going to be on a private network run by the government of that country. I can't imagine, or like the Federal Reserve banks. Right. I can't imagine using a public ledger for the CBDC itself. But the whole point of doing that over what they currently do, which is ones and zeros in a database, is that then it'll be interoperable. And it'll be very easy to take the coins on that private ledger and move them to public ledgers in wrapped versions. And you can have this then enabling the entire ecosystem. And it becomes very, very easy. I think we're going to see CBDCs do that.
Does Hedera have a branch off private ledger that they can do that, or they would have to build their own proprietary blockchain or whatever it may be, or ecosystem? But like you said, it can move on to a public ledger like Hedera.
Oh, it's all open source. So right now you can download all the source code. You can even download a Docker image that contains all the different files you need. It even contains a little mirror node and a mainnet node and all that stuff. So yes, you can easily clone the code to create something like Hedera, exactly like Hedera, but it's on your private network if you trust the people running the computers. And usually that's the problem. But if you're the Federal Reserve, you already have the banks running the computers. You have a trusted network to do it. The cool thing, though, is that if you use the Hedera code base, then you're going to get all of the interledger stuff that we add. And so we have state proofs, which are cryptographic ways that the network can prove to you that some information you get from it is correct. This is important. It's as if all the nodes were digitally signing, saying, yeah, that's really the correct thing. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but it just makes it where you can trust it. And so then you can have interledger communication where the state proof is proving to that ledger that this ledger really thinks something. And if you just take a clone of Hedera as your private network, that will enable that sort of thing too.
And you mentioned like some banks are part of the governing council. Are they using Hedera for payments as one of the use cases? That's a huge use case, probably the largest, right, in the world, moving of money cross borders and whatever it may be. Is that also a use case you're targeting?
Absolutely. So I'm very excited about cross-border payments, which are being done by people like Shinhan Bank, oldest bank in South Korea. And they have done now they did a POC and now they've done a second POC that's evolving into a real thing for being able to use stable coins. And you can have a stable coin denominated in the South Korean won, and you could have one in South African rand, and then you can transfer them in seconds, and you have finality. It isn't like sending a wire where it takes days and it costs you $30. By the way, if you're going from South Korea to South Africa, a wire might actually cost you $30 in US dollars. It blows my mind. But what they're setting up is a system that can be fast and secure and can be auditable and can be in moments, and it can reach the unbanked in developing countries. They are really pushing hard on this. I think the future of money is going to be convenience and power to the users, as opposed to the expensive, slow banking system that many people are excluded from. And you have a billion people that are unbanked. I think that Hedera is moving towards that, and Shinhan is really leading the charge on that.
Yeah, there was also news, and I saw it circulating a couple of weeks ago, Dropp, a micropayments platform, which is built on Hedera. It was showcased by the FedNow folks on their website, which a great endorsement. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is the future. So part of the problem with the whole ecosystem of payments with banks is that everything is slow and hard to do and expensive, and there's all sorts of problems. FedNow is a step towards improving that. And so the Federal Reserve has created the FedNow program to make it easier to move things. But of course, you have to have software that lets you do it, right? Just creating a protocol doesn't help if nobody can actually access it. And so what they have done is that they announced that Dropp, there's a program, DROPP. Dropp is a wallet that allows you to manage cryptocurrencies and so on. It's built on Hedera, and that FedNow is integrating it so that it would also be able to do these FedNow transactions. This is the future. And I was very, very happy to see that. Many people were excited to see Dropp being announced by the Fed themselves on the Fed website, that they have integrated FedNow. I thought that was really cool. And so I think there'll be a lot more of those announcements, and they will become old hat at some point. But this time, it got a lot of interest, just because there's not very many who have done it yet. But ultimately, it'll be, I think, lots of wallets and lots of people will be doing this.
Hard question for you. Do you see Hedera Hashgraph as, I want to say, is it third or fourth generation blockchain? Once again, I'm using that word loosely, as a fourth generation blockchain, let's say. And do you see any competitors that are, in that fourth generation realm with you guys?
So I don't see competitors that have both the good technology and the good governance. The governance is actually pretty rare. And a lot of people say, I don't care. I just trust it, and the programmers who do governance, I'll kind of trust them. Maybe I'll even trust a ledger that has lots of nodes, half of which are on Amazon. So Amazon Corporation, controls half the network. I'll just trust it. Okay, well, that's fine. But what would be better is if you have what we're providing. We're really trying to make something that could be trusted for the next 100 years. And so I don't see people doing that yet, and I think maybe more people will over time. But I think it's important. I think that it matters. It's not enough to have a lot of nodes. They actually have to be on different companies. And it's not enough to say anybody can vote and govern if it just ends up being a handful of people that actually end up doing so. You really need the transparency. You need to have some of these rules in place that prevent excessive consolidation of power, to prevent it from becoming centralized. There's lots of forces in the world that move things towards centralization. And that's why we've baked in the decentralization of control, of governance from the very beginning. I think that's important. And maybe we'll see other ledgers in the future that do the same thing.
Yeah, I think you guys are certainly ahead of the curve there. And that's why I wanted to ask that question. If, you had your sights on anybody who may be trying to emulate what you guys are doing, but I haven't seen anything like that. Talk to us about the tokenomics, the max supply, in addition to the transactions how many transactions per second you handle. And also, I believe there was proof of stake added, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us about that, if you can.
Yes. So the supply of HBARs, that's the cryptocurrency you have to use to do a transaction, is fixed at 50 billion. It will never change. There is no inflation. There is no deflation. It is predictable. This was a plan from the very beginning, and it is baked into the DNA of the system. You have a fixed supply, and you can rely on that. I think inflation's a bad idea. There's lots of reasons for saying that. I'm not the only person who has ever said that. The only reason you might say inflation is good is because maybe someday you just don't have enough coins. But every coin can be broken into 100 million pieces. It's not an issue. You're always going to have enough coins. So really, I think that being non-inflationary is important, and non-deflationary even. Some people will lose their keys. In some sense, that's deflation, but that's probably a small part of it. And I'm working on DREC, trying to get all the ledgers together to stop people from losing their keys as well. Right. So I think that is important. We have proof of stake. We said from the beginning that we were going to be proof of stake. A little over a year ago, we added proof of stake. So we are proof of stake. We bootstrapped it with a high interest rate, or a high reward rate, a high reward rate of 6.5%. And we said from the beginning that it would be, very, very low, because that's really what you need for the security. You need some rewards, but you don't need enormous rewards. Right. And so now it's on a slope going back down to really low. But for the first year, we had a very high reward rate for that, and to get it bootstrapped. And we're pleased with that. We're pleased with lots of people staking, and we expect that to grow, the number of people staking to grow, because, why wouldn't you? And it helps secure the network, especially as we go to permissionless nodes. So I'm happy about the proof of stake stuff. I'm happy about the fixed HBAR supply stuff. I think those are useful things.
And then transactions per second.
Yeah.
I thought I saw like 18,000, if I'm not mistaken. My numbers may be off.
Okay. Right now, we have slowed the network down to a mere 10,000 transactions per second. And that's that's a lot. We will be able to increase that when we need to, as we if the usage starts to get close to 10,000, we can easily increase it. We can increase it substantially on a single shard. And then if we need more than that, if you need 1 billion per second, you can't do that in a single shard. No one computer could do it. So you do sharding. And we can do sharding. And because of state proofs, we can be ABFT at the sharded level too, this ultra security. But right now, 10,000 is more than enough, and we can increase it when we need it. The actual usage of the network is around 1,000 transactions per second, which is an enormous volume. And these are real transactions. Some people might call transactions per second fake ones that are used to do consensus within the network itself. We're not counting it that way. These are real transactions, each transaction paid for by a user. This one is actually, the majority of them are coming from one use case, but we have a pipeline of other use cases coming along, and I'm excited about that. And so right now with 1,000 a second, we're by far the fastest. If you go to realtps.com, they subtract .net, they subtract out the fake TPS and compare the ledgers for real TPS, which is why they're called realtps.net. And we're number one by a big margin. This is why we've now processed 19 billion transactions.
Wow.
Immutably recorded in this blockchain history. And we're going strong. It continues to accelerate.
And with regards to the governing council, the Googles, the IBMs, Dells, and so forth, are they holding the same supply of tokens each individually? Is it distributed that way, or is it dependent on certain things?
No. So there's no particular mechanism where they have to hold a lot or we give them a lot. That just doesn't happen. When they join the council, they have to pay $100. And then when they leave, we give it back. And so we didn't want strange incentive structures there. So no, the tokens are held by people out in the community. There's some still in the LLC. So there's a LLC that just kind of arranges the meetings where the council members talk to each other. It doesn't have power. It just kind of coordinates the talking between them. Like lots of foundations do that. You have some staff that organizes the meetings. And the LLC has some HBARs that we call treasury, but the LLC staff is physically unable to get access to them. The only way they transfer is if the council as a whole signs off on the transaction. You need a majority of the council signing the transaction to get it. And so those have, about 2/3 of those have been released over all the years we've been running. And so, the last third will dribble out over some long period of time. Actually I think we're getting close to a point where even the rate at which they dribble out is going down substantially in the next month or two, I think. I don't know. You can look at it. It's all in the treasury management report that's on the website. Sure. But we have lots of ordinary users have HBARs, and they're distributed. And we are looking forward to just seeing how the ecosystem as a whole grows. We have a lot of people that are very excited about Hedera. They want to build on it. They want to use it. And I love that.
Tell us about Swirls Labs, because how is that in relation to Hedera and supporting Hedera? Okay.
So the whole point was to be decentralized. So originally you had the 29 council members and you had Hedera that was coordinating the meetings. Oh, and Hedera was giving grants. Oh, and also Hedera was hiring the people that were building the software. Okay, that's not ideal. And that's, you have to start that way, so fine. So there was a little company called Swirls that was the private ledger using the Hashgraph thing, the private ledger company, but they spun out Hedera. Hedera did everything. Hedera got the IP of the Hashgraph and then open sourced it, all of that. And then we, a year and a half, 2 years ago, we spun out the grant-giving organizations. And so the HBAR Foundation was created to give grants of HBARs to people building the network, to, individual small companies and big companies that are going to build on the network or building a new company to build on Hedera. They were giving that out. And then the Hashgraph Association was later created to do the same thing and to do education and certification. And then the DLT Science Foundation was then created to do the same thing in the academic world. And so they fund research projects and they fund all sorts of academic type things. And so the three grant-giving organizations were split out. So we had the original Swirls was for the private ledgers, and now they don't do anything. And then they spun out Hedera, which was the council, and now they're just doing the council, they organize meetings of the council. And then you have the three grant-giving organizations And then you have Swirlds Labs, which is doing a lot of the engineering of building the software. And then we have other people that are starting to come in, and we have a new open source officer whose job is to go out and get more people to be building software. We have a number of people that build the software. And so the whole point has been to decentralize. And so you have all these independent organizations, and they're separate, and they have separate leadership. And this is our road to decentralization.
Oh, yeah, that definitely makes sense. Are there any new council members that you're excited about? I know we talked about Hyundai and Kia. Any others, any others that you can highlight that are maybe doing anything interesting?
Yeah, so Hyundai and Kia are cool. They're building on top of us. They are council members, but they're building on top of us, which is very cool. But Aberdeen is building on top of us, and they're a council member, and they're doing IoT. So we have a lot of council members that are building interesting things. And I mentioned people tokenizing houses and so on. That's through Toko, which was spun out from DLA Piper, one of the world's largest legal firms, and they're a council member. So a lot of these really interesting things. Avery Dennison is doing things where we even talked about it. It's not tokenization, it's supply chain tracking, which is an enormous thing. They have billions and billions and billions of items that they track through supply chains, and they're tokenizing that. That's this huge amount of traffic that's happening right now, tokenizing that. So we have council members that are really building huge things on top of us right now. When you track your supply chain this way, it gives people access into seeing the provenance of things. It allows you to do things like borrow against a widget in the pipeline even before it's sold. You can do interesting decentralized finance or even centralized finance that then uses those tokens. Lots of interesting use cases coming out of all of that.
For sure. So what's on the remainder of your 2023 roadmap? Anything you can give us a hint about? I know sometimes things are under wraps for PR release, but what can you highlight?
Oh, so the community is involved in this Hedera improvement process, HIP. So the community submits HIPs and says, this is something that ought to be added, a new feature. And then the community comes along and puts comments on that and discusses it. And eventually the community comes to a consensus on what should this new feature look like and should it be added. And then the council approves it. And then it ends up getting built and added to the network. And so we have this steady flood of HIPs, and it's been growing over time. I love the community involvement here. And over time, the community is saying what we need. And so all sorts of new features are being added. If you go look at the HIPs on GitHub, then you can see, 100 or so that are currently pending that people are discussing. And then as each one gets discussed enough, it gets approved, and then eventually it gets implemented. All of that is going on. I'm very excited about that. This is the community driving what features get put onto Hedera.
That's great.
Very nice. And then we have council members. We have 29 right now. We've always said we'd like to get up to 39. So we're continuing to look for council members. We've always held the bar very high, though. We won't take someone who isn't good. We only take the really good ones. But those continue to grow, and we still have a pipeline for that. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about I told you about the decentralization. We spun out Swirlds Labs a year ago, and now that really is working. All three of these grant-giving organizations and Swirlds Labs and Hedera proper are all just really on firing on all cylinders now. And I'm excited about that. So there's a lot going on. I would say this 100-year project is just at the beginning. And you haven't seen anything yet. There's a lot to come.
Well, I'm excited. You know, as I said at the beginning, I'm a fan of Hedera, and I think you guys are certainly leading in many areas ahead of the curve for sure. And I can't wait to see the new updates and things that are released. And I love the HIP, where the community can suggest ideas and things, and they can actually come to fruition. So that's really great. I want to talk more of the general crypto market at large. There's a lot of things that are still in the development phase, like DeFi, NFTs. There's NFTs on the Hedera network, as well as the Metaverse. What are your thoughts? Are we still very early? Are we DeFi 1.0, NFT 1.0, Metaverse 1.0? And when do you think we might see the tipping point where, we have the next billion users come in building and using these things?
Exactly. So what we're seeing right now is just the early stages of something that really is going to change the world. There's the first wave of NFTs was, just silly pictures, and that's all it is. Okay, it's great. It worked the bugs out of the system. It got people using them. But now we're starting to see real organizations building things of real value, tokenizing things in the real world of real value. Same thing with DeFi. Initially, all it was is, I'm going to lend you tokens that you can then use to buy other tokens that you'll use to buy other tokens, and I'm going to gamble on the whole thing. It's just nonsense.
Right.
But, got the bugs out and got it working. Now we're starting to see DeFi that's actually real finance, as in you can be funding your factory by borrowing against the widgets in your pipeline that have accounts receivables, or even before that, and you can tokenize them and borrow against them. You can tokenize gold and use it as an actual store of value. You can tokenize houses and get whole new business models of how you can buy a house and make it easier to buy a house. I was just talking about that a little while ago. We're starting to see finance grow up as well. And so DeFi is becoming real. NFTs are becoming real. We're seeing this across the board. The ability just to store information is becoming real. People like to store silly things, but now we're getting to where, like Avery Dennison has billions of different things that they're tracking, and they're now putting them all on the network. It's really cool. Not all of them. They're putting a lot of them on the network. It's cool that we're seeing the industry as a whole grow up. And so you asked, are there competitors? And that's kind of saying, well, how is the blockchain industry dividing the pie? That's not the exciting part. The exciting part is how fast the pie is growing, because we're still in the infancy. Lots of people in the world have heard of this blockchain NFT thing, but they're not actually using it in their daily lives. Right. And so we are just at the beginning, and we are seeing real traction of our industry becoming mainstream and fulfilling its potential, which is, I believe, every part of society will have ledgers involved as at least a piece of it. Just like today, every part of society has the internet as part of it. We don't do everything on the internet, but every business has the internet used in some way. Every school is using the internet in some way. Every society, club is using the internet in some way. We're going to see the same thing with ledgers. Everyone is going to be using the ledgers. Social media will have some component of it that is ledgers.
Sure.
Now, you won't put everything on the blockchain. Whenever I talk to someone, I say, hey, can you do this with a database? Don't use a blockchain if you can just trust a database well enough. But if you can't, then you need a blockchain for the additional trust. And then you go to Hedera. We're going to see this. We're going to see it take over the world, and we are seeing it happening now. Blockchains are taking over the world. DLTs are taking over the world. It is actually changing things.
Yeah, it's a brave new world. And I'm glad I'm here early, and it's exciting to watch it unfold. And I want to ask you about CBDCs. I know we talked about it earlier. Obviously, a lot of benefits, right? With tokenization and the tokenization of fiat currencies, a lot of benefits. One of the things people are concerned about, unfortunately, is that right to privacy. And for example, here in the United States, where we're both in, the alignment to the Constitution and our rights. What are your thoughts on that? And is it that we just have to keep working with the governments to educate them and steer them in the right direction?
Education is really important here. So we have a potential utopia as our future, but guess what? We also have a potential dystopia as our future. We have got to be working to make sure we end up on the good future, not the bad future. This is critically important. And of course, it is a problem right now. I mean, it's an issue right now. Well, how much privacy do you have with your bank account? How much privacy do you have with the loans you take, with the house you buy, and with the car you're driving, and all those other things? And I think that we can use various techniques, very simple techniques, in order to vastly improve the privacy we have right now. There are certain things like your bank account that the government has the ability to see, and lots of other people have the ability to see. And people at your bank have the ability to see. We can at least narrow it down so a much smaller number of people can see it. And we can also make it that if the people that need to see it, they have to cooperate among multiple organizations. You could say, well, maybe just the FBI can't arbitrarily spy on you. Maybe they have to agree with the courts, and the courts have to sign, and the FBI has to sign, and so on. It's a bigger issue that we could spend another hour talking about. Right. All I would say is that, first of all, our privacy level right now is pretty bad. We need to improve it substantially. And then secondly, it could get even worse than it is now in the future. But we need to make it much better than it is now in the future, and actually reach that future where we have far more privacy. And so it's a much longer discussion, but I would just say we need to educate. We need to educate ourselves, and then we need to educate those in power. We need to educate people in the media. We need to be having people understand this new scary thing, which is ledgers, and help them to understand the real potential of it.
For sure. So more of a personal question for you. We started off, you were talking about you being an entrepreneur. You've launched a lot of businesses with Mance and so forth. Do you still have that entrepreneurial itch where it's like, I've built this great Hashgraph and Hedera and so forth. Am I looking at maybe something else in the crypto industry or blockchain industry or outside of it? Are you staying put right now?
I'm staying put, but it's kind of fun. In Swirlds Labs, we're looking at ways that we can help the industry that we couldn't when we were part of Hedera. And the Hedera industry, the Hedera ecosystem. And so Swirlds Labs is looking at ways. Right now, we're doing a lot of work, building the software. But what else can we do that would help the industry, help the Hedera ecosystem? And so we're looking at that, and that's kind of entrepreneurial, and that's kind of fun. So yeah, the entrepreneurial itch doesn't go away, and we're constantly doing entrepreneuring within, and we're still a startup, I feel like, and so it's just exciting still. I think the difference between big companies that succeed and that fail are the big companies that succeed are those that act like a startup or have little startups inside of them. And our ecosystem is still in its infancy. We need to act like a startup and think outside the box of ways to improve our industry.
Do you think AI is a threat to blockchains and crypto, or as AI becomes more, there's further iterations of it, there's also further iterations of the blockchain, and we can integrate AI to police AI? I don't know, but that's a question a lot of people often ask. What if AI does something to hack or break blockchains?
Okay, so no, I don't think AI is a threat to blockchain. I do think that there are ways that it can help. And so we have talked about, and even more so, the way blockchain can help AI. A lot of the fears with AI right now are, first of all, it lies all the time. That's not entirely good. But secondly, there's all sorts of worries about the data. Where do you get the data? It's only as good as your training data. And who owns that data? And have you used it without their permission? And maybe they want royalties. Well, if I have millions of people giving me data, I can't pay each of them $1. That's millions of dollars. But I can pay each of them a millionth of a cent. That's easy. And maybe ledgers can allow you then to do micropayments to the people that gave you the data. And they can track permissioning. So I give you permission to use my data, and then tomorrow I turn off my permission, and the ledger can make sure that you know that and that you stop using my data for your AI. I think there's a lot of ways that ledgers can help AI. AI may be able to help ledgers too. You talked about using it to find bugs. Well, that's actually a good thing. If the good guys can use AI to find the bugs, then we get rid of all the bugs. That's a good thing.
All right.
And so that actually is helpful. Even further, I think that formal methods are important. Ultimately, the world of software is going to change, and most pieces of software are going to come with the code and the comments. So the code talks to the computer, the comments talk to the human, and a third component, which is an actual math proof that your code matches its specs, that your math code is correct in many ways. And I think that's right now in its infancy because it's so expensive to do. We at Hedera have done this. So the Hashgraph algorithm, I kept saying it was ABFT. I had a math proof. I wrote it, published it, and you publish it. When you're writing a math proof for other mathematicians, it's kind of high level, and they kind of fill in the details in their mind. And sometimes they make mistakes, and sometimes people publish proofs that are wrong. What we did is we had a professor at Carnegie Mellon that took that and put it into a computer in a way that the computer itself could understand and check the math proof. And it did. And it checked it and said, yep, it's ABFT. This is the future of software, but it is incredibly expensive and hard to do and slow right now. But you know what? I am optimistic that AI is going to make it so easy to do that we start using it across all of software engineering. This is the goal I want to get to. I want to see AI enable us to do that. And once you've done that, you absolutely eliminate whole classes of bugs. You can just say, I never want anything to leave my account on the ledger except if it's done by someone who knows my private key. And you can just make that a specific math statement. And then it looks through your entire millions of lines of code and makes sure that it is guaranteed to have that property. So I can never say, we'll eliminate all bugs, but we can eliminate classes of bugs. Sure. AI, the biggest effect of AI on Web3 is going to be that.
It's fascinating. I wish we had more time to chat about it, but I know we're coming up on time. I got some wrap up questions here for you. If you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
Oh, the theme has got to be creators, allowing the users of it to be creating things. I absolutely love that. So Minecraft and Second Life got famous for that. Something like World of Warcraft is very famous and widely used, but it's not all about being able to create the universe. I would absolutely want metaverses that allow users to create the universe, like Second Life and Minecraft and some of those, and Roblox. 2 out of 3 of those are for kids. That's interesting. Grown-ups need to get in on this. We need to be able to create our own worlds. But I really think the future is empowering the users to create their own things and to take their assets from platform to platform. You should own your assets and have the ability, which means an NFT, have the ability to move it to other platforms.
I got some rapid fire questions here for you. Favorite food?
I really love food. I like pizza. I went to France for the first time recently. I would say pretty much everything they serve in France. I'm a big fan of food.
Favorite musician or band?
I have wide tastes. I listen to a lot of Christian music. It's interesting, but yeah, a wide range, I'd say.
And favorite movie?
I like fantasy and science fiction movies a lot. The recent Spider-Verse movie was probably the last one I saw that I walked out saying, wow, that's really good. Except for the one minor flaw is it ends with a to be continued, which of course is a huge flaw. But other than that, it was a fantastic movie.
And favorite book?
Favorite book? I read a lot of biographies. So I've read recent biographies. Benjamin Franklin has a great autobiography. There was one of Teddy Roosevelt I read recently. It was interesting. Funny thing was, I was actually more interested about what it said about his dad. I'd like to read a biography of his dad more than of him, but I like those.
And when you're not working at Hedera, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
Math is fun. I still do math. I told you, I have problems I work on, not because they're useful, just because they're fun and interesting. And some of them will be useful, and some of them will absolutely not be useful. And some of them I'll solve someday, and some I guarantee you I won't solve any day. But it's just a fun hobby to work on math.
Oh, that's awesome. Dr. Leemon, great chatting with you. I'm excited for future updates around Hedera, and certainly would like to have you back on in the future. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great. Thanks. It's been great talking to you. Thank you.